This Saturday episode of New Politics was released on the 1st of August, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Why does politics always end up being such a huge disappointment? And whose interests are governments really serving? Australia's democracy isn't broken, but political power is flowing in the wrong direction, and that's what needs to change. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And if you're listening in and haven't subscribed to our website at New Politics, you're missing out on half of what we do. There's regular articles and analysis of this strange world of politics. It's all free, and you can subscribe at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, if you do want to support us, it's just $5 per month at Patreon and Substack, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. It's a question that we get asked at New Politics quite frequently, but why is it that politics is always so disappointing, and why is the public always let down by it? And that's in reference to some of the events that have occurred over the past week. The first one was Anthony Albanese attending a fundraising dinner at a billionaire's mansion in Point Piper, where guests were expected to fork out $10,000 each. There was also the Labor Party's national conference, where there was a massive gap between the rank and file membership and the Labor Party platform, and then what the Labor Party actually does when they're in government. And then we had the leadership challenge in Victoria, and leadership change, which has occurred just 4 months out from their state election. And on the Liberal Party side, the leader of the Liberal Party, Angus Taylor, is being linked to a corruption case involving the conservative Christian group, the Reformers, and that's a group that wants to remove laws that support abortion, euthanasia and same-sex marriage. And the Young Liberals have also collected a dirt file dossier on former New South Wales Liberal Party ministers. Now, all of these different stories, they might seem unrelated, David, but they're actually part of the same problem, I think, that political parties have become more inclined about preserving their own power and implementing their own personal ideologies rather than working in the public interest or getting an understanding of what the public wants rather than what they personally want. And I think there is a clear link where we can see that over the past few decades, new governments might function well during their first term, and then a few years into their second term, that's when it all starts to fall apart. So if we're getting 4 or 5 years of good governance during that term of new government, it's all we can expect. And the question is, well, is this because government is just getting harder? Have we got the wrong people in office? Or is it because the systems that we have in place are out of date and just don't work anymore?
I think there's a mixture of both. Raymond Chandler, the great crime writer, I think it's The Lady in the Lake, one of his lesser books, but a great one. One of the few actual crime mysteries he wrote. He wrote detective stories rather than mysteries. But he said something along the lines of, the trouble with policing is it is a profession that requires the very best people, but there's nothing in it for the very best people. And I think that's true of politics too. It's a profession that requires, and that we expect, an almost supernatural level of competence and moral judgment and administrative perfection and a lack of all the things that make us human. I guess you'd say negative things that make us human. Fatigue. You can't be fatigued. You got to work 70 hours a week, And you've got to balance everybody's interests equally. There can be no losers in a system that is set up for losers, that someone has to win. You've got to make the right decision every time. You've got to make everybody happy every time. Why would you go into it? Now, it's very well paid. Let's not be churlish here. But a lot of people leave after 1 or 2 terms because they're burnt out. Because we expect from these people more than any human can give, which I think that's a big problem. I think, too, the parties select safer candidates And hello to all our politicians listening. I'm not referring to you necessarily, but I think you know where I'm coming from. The parties select safer candidates. The parties select people who've worked for the party, not necessarily for the community. And again, I point to the many exceptions to the rule on all sides of politics. I think the big thing, though, is that we have an electorate who has had enough and who aren't interested and who'll never be interested and who want to not engage because they don't see anything worth engaging with, which allows some of our lesser political figures to thrive because they can get away with stuff. So there's a whole range of reasons. And of course, our press don't help. But I've spoken at length about that and I don't want to bore everyone again.
I think the other factor is that Australia's democracy is still one of the strongest in the world, and we always have a peaceful change of government. I don't think there's ever been a riot at any election when there's been a change of government. And even during the unconstitutional sacking of Gough Whitlam in 1975, there was still a peaceful change of government at the subsequent election, which happened about a month after that, in December 1975. And elections are generally free and fair. We have compulsory voting, independent judicial system, more or less, and a Senate system that can usually hold governments to account. So the real problem isn't so much whether these institutions work or not. I think they do work more or less. It's about who gets the most access to them. And we started off talking about the Prime Minister's dinner. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong about a Prime Minister meeting business leaders because you expect that a Prime Minister is going to meet all sorts of people. But when this access comes with a $10,000 price tag, and we know that nothing in politics is free. There's always a cost to all of this sort of stuff. There's always an expectation that you're going to get something in return. There's just always an agenda involved when there's money exchange. But renters, nurses, pensioners, ordinary workers, they don't get the same opportunities to put their concerns directly to the nation's leaders. And sure, there are those union leaders and community-based peak bodies such as ACOS or NCOS. They have their representations heard by ministers, but there's nothing like this kind of action where you pay $10,000 and there you go, all your policy gets implemented. So democracy is supposed to be built on political equality. Now, I know that's never going to be perfect, but that's what the model is based on, that you're trying to get equality, or at least working towards that, and not giving out favours to those who can afford to pay up.
Yeah, and that's a big problem. Anybody should be able to approach the Prime Minister, or any Minister of the Crown, or any of the loyal opposition with reasonable concerns. By reasonable, I don't mean the staff are there to filter out either stuff that can be dealt with by the staff, that's fairly administrative and simple, but also to filter out people who want to talk about how the Illuminati bankers are taking over the world and they're really just a bunch of lizard people and what are you going to do about it? That's an extreme, but of course a minister doesn't have time to be dealing with these types of unfounded claims, shall I say. So it becomes an issue when you can pay to have access. Now, the ministers, and again this takes it back to something I've been pushing for a long time, a return to fully publicly funded elections, rather than elections that it depends on which party has the most money. You get your payment per vote, you have enough members so that you're a fairly serious candidate, not a frivolous candidate. Although, as we've seen in Britain, a frivolous candidate like Count Binface just might be what the electorate required to pop a hole in the pretensions of essentially a con artist like Farage. But when I say serious, people who have a chance of being heard rather than someone running and they get 6 votes. You want someone who adds to the public debate in a meaningful way. And a well thought through public elections will help that. I think parties have to remember that they have a responsibility to put the best people, not party hacks, not seat warmers, but people who are there to represent their local communities, their state, their country. And I've said before, there are some really excellent backbencher candidates who in all parties, really, who really do try and represent everyone as best as they can. We should be encouraging this. Whether we do or not's a whole other issue, but we should be encouraging this.
Well, we should always be encouraging different people to run for politics. I'd personally like to see Lord Wheelie Bin in Australia. And you get a number of different colours there, the red one, the green one.
Yellow, yep.
Yeah, I think in some states there is a blue bin available as well. So Lord Wheelie Bin, wherever you are, come on down. But one issue that we talked a little bit about last week, and that was the national conference for the Labor Party. National conferences, it doesn't matter which party it's for, there's supposed to be these sort of situations where political parties do decide their future. And this is one of the concerns that our audience members have been suggesting, that this is one reason why politics just seems to be so disappointing. But the 50th Labor National Conference, that ended last week, and as far as I'm concerned, it was a complete waste of time. But there's all these issues such as Gaza and Palestine, there's AUKUS, gambling advertising, putting more checks and balances on corporations. All of these ideas were either totally ignored or severely watered down. And my reading of this is that it's not just the electorate that's being ignored or being lied to, it's the Labor membership as well. And we're singling out the Labor Party in this case because they've just had their national conference, but it's the same for the Liberal Party. Whenever they have their national conference or state conferences, it's the same sort of situation. And whatever their membership wants, for the Liberal Party, whatever their membership wants, which is broadly reflective of what the Liberal voting public would be after, that gets ignored or it gets thrown out, and then the executive starts following its own far-right ideological agenda. So for both of the major parties, the executive ignores their membership, whether they're in opposition or government. They tend to be more right-wing than their memberships are, and that goes for the Labor Party and for the Liberal Party. And they all talk about trying to get more people or more members and more people involved in politics, but that's all window dressing. They don't actually want more members. They want less members. And the membership of political parties hasn't dropped off because people are not interested in politics. I'd suggest that there's more people interested in politics than ever before, but they're not joining up with these political parties because they're not really wanted by these major political parties. They want less people, not more people involved in their party structures.
Gaza's a big thing. The membership want recognition of Palestine. And there's a whole range of subtlety and nuance in what that means. But the leadership doesn't want recognition of Palestine, mostly because it's too difficult. It creates problems with international relations. It creates problems with certain donors. It creates problems with certain members as well. It's a type of thing that a good, robust, and hopefully healthy debate at the national conference could at least try and sort out. Let's not go into the role of the trade union in the Labor Party, which I'd have thought was pretty much a lay-down misere in the Labor Party, but apparently not. There are those members of the Labor Party who want to not support unions or want to support them in a much lesser way, and who think that the union movement is holding the Labor Party back. It's an interesting claim. But again, maybe it is time for the union movement to change its view in ways that it maybe hasn't before and modernise to a new form of trade unionism. It's a debate worth having. I don't think anybody denies that in any substantive way, but it's still a debate that just isn't going to happen because the leadership, whomever that may be, has determined that they're not going to engage with it because it's just too difficult. And it might mean that certain people who are currently benefiting from the system stop benefiting from the system. And that, of course, may or may not be a right thing. And the cycle continues. So we have these stage-managed worthy speeches, almost Stalinesque, in the great leader has declared, the great leader, or the party has declared, vote, good, we're all sorted, next, let's go to the bar. And Labor could reform in that way. It's the same problem in the Liberal Party, but the Liberal Party have always been a little bit more honest about that's how they deal with it.
Well, also, we've been asked, where is the courage in the political system? But I just think it's a situation where modern politics rewards the caution and not so much the courage. And part of this is through that process of years and years and years of neoliberalism, where a lot of government functions have been sold off or given out to the private sector, and there's not that much that a government can do to show a bit of courage. And you get a situation where governments promise things like affordable housing, cheaper energy, higher wages, promise more action on climate change, gambling reform, pretty much whatever you can think of. But all of those industries where government could actually make a change or make a difference, and that's mining, banking, property, gambling, defence, health, education, a lot of that's been outsourced. It still exists, obviously, and the government can set up legislation to have oversight on all of these areas, but it doesn't actually directly control that. So it's hard to show courage over the things that you cannot control. And also all of these industries, they've got access to the government through lobbying and political donations. So there's a resistance to these reforms. There's a high level of caution because acquiescing to all of these vested interests makes all of these problems just so much harder to resolve as time goes on. And I think that's why a Prime Minister like Anthony Albanese, who is a cautious incrementalist, well, he's got great success at the moment. And then I realise there's a whole lot of other reasons behind that, but he's got great success at the moment as the cautious incrementalist because the system itself rewards this sort of caution.
Yeah, we want a system that I think, but it does. We spoke about Dan Andrews in our last podcast. Dan Andrews aimed big, swung hard, went for stuff, and on the whole succeeded. And succeeded probably in the only way that counts in a political system. He succeeded electorally. That's about as best as you can hope for as a politician. But he is one of the most, when I say one of the most hated politicians, those that hate him far more than they hate, say, somebody like Anthony Albanese or even Pauline Hanson. And I know that there are those who are saying, come to my place, I'll show you. And I know what you mean. But we don't get that level of hate reported in the way that it was reported for Daniel Andrews. And again, I shouldn't have to qualify this, but I do. It doesn't mean to say I agreed with everything Daniel Andrews did. I'm just observing here what is going on. Yeah, it's a weird situation that we want reformers, but when we give somebody the mandate to reform, they don't take it. But this seems to help them electorally. Anthony Albanese has been an extremely effective and successful electoral juggernaut. More quietly than Dan Andrews, but still not unsuccessful. He's built on his majority every time, almost unprecedentedly, and definitely unexpectedly. So do we have a system that rewards incrementalism while praising reform? Maybe that's the problem.
Oh, and David, I'm sorry I'm sorry to the audience as well. I'm sorry if we're painting a very depressing picture of Australian politics because, generally we are very positive people. We're very chirpy and friendly and happy. The sun's still coming up every day. The walls of society haven't come tumbling down. The revolution hasn't started yet. Not yet anyway, comrade. And there's no pitchforks on the streets.
Next year.
Next year, anytime soon. So it's not as bad as we're making it out to be. But our biggest issue is that it could be so much better. And the good news is that most of the solutions already exist and could be implemented the next time Parliament sits. I know that they won't, but that could happen theoretically if there was a will to actually do so. And there's issues such as donation laws, real-time donations. There's tougher laws on lobbying, having transparency on who ministers meet with and who the Prime Minister meets with, having access to their ministerial diaries. I think that would be a good thing. Better protections for whistleblowers and for journalists, better access to freedom of information, truth in political advertising. I think there was actually a bill that was put up in Parliament during the last term but not acted upon. Reworking of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. National Anti-Corruption Commission is already in place, but it's just ineffective. If you've got something that's ineffective, you improve it. So these are just some ideas. A lot of this stuff is it's piecemeal, but it's already in place more or less on some type of level, not very effectively. And it's not like you have to rewrite the Constitution and go to a referendum for any of these issues that we've just talked about, and there's many other issues too. It can be implemented by Parliament. And a lot of these ideas, it's about redistributing the political power and swinging it back to the electorate and back to the public. And this is where political power should exist within a democracy. And pretty much every government decision, well, it always takes into account how's this decision going to affect property investors when it comes to housing reform or capital gains tax. How is this going to affect miners and corporate interests when it comes to a gas exporters tax? How does this legislation affect our donors? And I think that's the process that has to change, where governments have to start thinking, how is this legislation going to affect renters or people that want to buy and live in their own house, or consumers worried about gas prices and costs of living? And sure, governments do some of this. Of course they do. Otherwise they'd be thrown out at the next election. But predominantly the thinking is more about what is the political costs of not doing what these vested interests are after. And that's already the already wealthy and property classes. They just need to start looking at the political costs of the overall electorate, not just the select few.
Yeah, and the governments that tend to be remembered are those that worked for more of the community than less of the community. And again, I don't understand how you go into politics without one eye on your legacy. Now, that legacy is a big word and it can mean a whole lot of things, some of which we agree with, some of them we don't. But I'd hate to think that you go and spend 20 years in politics and not have achieved at least one relatively positive thing. But there's been plenty who have. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.